This interview is taking place at the Atlanta History Museum on April 14th, 2004. We are here to interview William Franklin Anderson. Mr. Anderson, will you kindly spell your name and give me the location and date of your birth?
Good. My name is William F. Anderson, W-I-L-L-I-A-M F. Anderson, A-N-D-E-R-S-O-N. I was born in 96, South Carolina, on May 31st, 1922.
Thank you very much. And can you tell me, at the beginning of the story, how did you come to be involved in World War II?
Well, I was a student at Clemson College, and at the time, Clemson was a military school. We lived in barracks, took Army training, and when World War II occurred, we were automatically deferred. We enlisted, most of the people in my class enlisted in 1942, June 1942. When we enlisted, we were told that we would be allowed to continue in school. They did not guarantee that we would finish school, but that we would be deferred at least until the end of our junior year.
Did all of the men in the school enlist?
I would say probably 99% of them did.
Many of them friends of yours that...
Yes, oh yes, still friends. When we were activated in June of 1943, we were sent to Camp Croft in Spartanburg, South Carolina, for basic infantry training.
How old were you at this time?
Let's see, I was 21 years old. We went to Camp Croft and received infantry basic training, and I remember distinctly the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and the corporals, who were our trainers. They had been career Army people. Most of them were in their 50s and 60s at that time. But it was a hardened group of non-commissioned officers that really knew what they were doing with a bunch of recruits. They gave us good training.
Can you tell me, when you arrived to Camp Croft, what was it like? What were your living arrangements? What was an average day like?
We lived in barracks, of course, which were temporary barracks built at Camp Croft for the specific purpose of giving infantry basic training, which lasted about 3 months, as I recall. We would get up early in the morning. We would do some sort of like rifle training, learning to shoot rifles, or learning to handle other military weapons during the course of the day, with a lot of physical training, and not much activity after dark because we were not allowed to leave the base. But we were required to stay there until we completed infantry basic training. We were told that if we completed the infantry basic training satisfactorily, we would then be a candidate for Officer Candidate School, which would be at Fort Benning, Georgia, where they trained people for second lieutenant's commission. Most of the people from Clemson finished basic training with me, and as a group we went to Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia.
So this was a group of primarily your friends.
Yes.
That you were going through this experience.
Yeah, people that I knew at school.
Can you tell me a little bit during your training, your basic training, what were your feelings? Were you nervous about your upcoming battle experience?
No, never gave it a thought, really. This was, as you can see, this was 1943. By the time we finished basic training in Officer Candidate School, it was getting along pretty well in the war. Being concerned about anything regarding the war never occurred to us, most of us, I don't think. Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning was another experience. We trained there to become second lieutenants. Most of us made it. A few washed out, did not make it for one reason or another. But we graduated from officer candidate school, I believe, as an infantry unit commander. And that was the 15th of June, 1944, that we graduated from officer candidate school. A number of the fellows who were graduating from officer candidate school at the same time were sent to Europe immediately as replacement officers. I was one of the fortunate few that was allowed to remain at Fort Benning. They had brought in an old division, the 71st Infantry Division, which had been training at Camp Carson in Colorado for mountain warfare with mules in Italy. But at this point in the war, the Army decided that the mule operation for fighting in the mountains was not going to be necessary, since they pretty much defeated the Italians anyway. So they had brought the 71st Division into Fort Benning, stripped it, sent a lot of the people to Europe as replacements, including officers and enlisted personnel, and started to rebuild the division. And I was assigned as an infantry unit commander to Company M of the 66th Infantry Division, 66th Infantry Regiment, 71st Division, on the 15th of June, 1945. Correction, 15th of June, 1944.
Can you just describe to me a little bit about Fort Benning at that time, and what memories you have of arriving there, and what was there, and what was an average day at OCS?
Well, it was not really a lot different from an average day at infantry basic training, because we were all corporals at that time. When we graduated from Camp Croft infantry basic training, we were privates, but when we graduated, we became corporals. So we were all corporals, and the training in OCS was not much different. It was a little more intense. You were training you used a rifle, you were training leadership training classes. I was assigned to Company M in the regiment, which is usually the heavy weapons company. And by heavy weapons, I mean 50 caliber machine guns and 81 millimeter mortars. Those are bigger weapons than the regular platoons in a company had at that time. They usually had 60 millimeter mortars and 30 caliber machine guns. So I took a little different training than some of the folks at OCS to get qualified to be an infantry unit commander in a heavy weapons company. One interesting thing about my time at Fort Benning was, as I mentioned earlier, I was assigned to the 71st Division. And the 71st Division was given orders, or received orders, to leave for Europe. And we was told to, and given instructions on how to pack everything up, and we did, packed up everything, got it ready to go on trains for transport to New York, and then I was assigned to a packing and crating school at Camp Gordon in Augusta, Georgia. This is 2 weeks after we'd packed up everything. So anyway, I learned to pack and crate all of our equipment at the packing and crating school in Camp Gordon in Augusta, Georgia. We went back to Fort Benning, joined the regiment, and we were entrained and shipped to New York. Well,
Do you know approximately when this was?
This was in December of 1944.
So you took trains to New York?
Took trains to New York. And there we were transferred to ships and set sail for Liverpool. We arrived in Liverpool, or Southampton, I guess it was. Southampton we arrived and spent the night, overnight aboard ship in Southampton, and then they took us to Le Havre the next day, and we arrived in France. we were assigned to Camp Lucky Strike. They had several camps where soldiers just landing in France, the fighting had passed this point, and they had camp like Old Gold, Lucky Strike, Chesterfield, and you were assigned to one of those camps pending where you were going to be committed to battle. We were at Camp Lucky Strike, rained every day for about a week.
What was it like at Lucky Strike? A lot of men?
A lot of people, and a mess. You were living in tents and in the mud. Not a very good time.
Cold.
Cold. But
What'd you eat?
what did we eat? I'm not sure. I don't think we had anything except cold rations. I don't remember a mess hall of any sort. I think it was cold rations, either C rations or K rations. C rations were little tin cans of beans or stew or something, as opposed to K rations, which was packed like Cracker Jack, and covered in wax, a little square box. So if you had C rations, you were in good shape. You had something to eat out of a tin can.
Did you get Lucky Strikes?
Yeah. Camp Lucky Strike, yeah. Did have some Lucky Strikes. But we were at Camp Lucky Strike for maybe, I would say, about 5 or 6 days, if that long.
And that is a transitional...
Yes.
And then?
You were at Camp Lucky Strike. That's when you first landed in France, and as I say, the fighting had already passed this part of France, and they were down toward Nancy, along the Maginot Line, and just getting ready to go into Germany. So we were put on trucks and carried down to a location near Nancy, France, where we joined the 3rd Army.
And were you still with your friends from Clemson at this point?
Yes, there were maybe 4 or 5 in the regiment or battalion. There were none in my company, which is a group of about 200 men. But we had been assigned different places when we left OCS, Officer Candidate School. Can you hold that thing just a minute? Let me check.
So the trucks brought you down outside of Nancy.
Right, and we joined the 3rd Army outside of Nancy, and we're just starting the Central European campaign at that time, and we're trying to outflank the German army to the east and southeast. The Battle of the Bulge ensued about a month later, to give you a little time frame as to when this was. We were assigned to the 3rd Army, and were in combat off and on for a couple of months. I say off and on because toward the end of the time that I was in Europe, and I left Europe wounded in April of '45, and most of late March and early April, we spent a lot of time in combat with the Germans, and then we would lose touch with them, and we're trying to run and catch up with them some way, to find them.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your combat experiences in those months?
Yeah. Generally speaking, the Germans would be in a position, and we would attack the position. They were in either bunkers or the Siegfried Line. We passed through the Siegfried Line, which were concrete bunkers. Or they were in houses or other places where they thought they were fortified a little bit, and we would have to overrun them, literally.
You were on foot?
On foot, yes. Now,
Rifles?
yes, yes. Except, again, if you remember, I was with a heavy weapons company in an infantry battalion. The battalion is made up of 3 companies of foot soldiers that are literally foot soldiers. But the heavy weapons company had jeeps because we needed the jeeps to transport the mortars and the ammunition. So toward the middle of April, we had pretty much lost contact with the German army. We didn't know where they were. They were retreating faster than we could keep up with them. And on the afternoon of April the 16th, 1945, I was asked to take a patrol, motorized patrol, all jeeps, and to move forward of our positions into and through Germany in an effort to try to establish some contact with the Germans. Earlier in that day, we had run across a little unit, I guess a squad of German soldiers somewhere, and I had my first experience that day with a motorcycle. We captured these German soldiers, and one of the things captured was a motorcycle, and this was in a town called Bitche, B-I-T-C-H-E, Bitche, Germany. I remember the name and I remember the motorcycle incident because I got started downhill and I realized I didn't know how to stop it. so the German Army motorcycle, it did a number on me. It threw me in the ground. But later on that afternoon, I was asked by my battalion commander to take a motorized patrol and to go toward a little town called Kaiserlautern, Kaiserlautern, I believe is the way you spelled it, and see if we could establish contact with the Germans, and if so, to report back to them. We started into Kaiserlautern in the outskirts of the town, and we were ambushed by some German soldiers in a ditch alongside the road. And we went motorized in jeeps. I think there were 4 jeeps with maybe 4 men in each jeep. And the first 2 jeeps were allowed by a little bit, and then they hit us with bazookas right in the right front wheel. So we were disabled. The jeeps were disabled, blown off the road, and a couple of the fellows were seriously injured in the jeep I was in. I was wounded in the right arm. We went into town, got into the edge of town, and we thought that we'd probably be smarter to try to spend the night there than try to get back through the lines if there were Germans.
Were you on foot at this point? Or?
Yes, we were on foot because the jeeps, 2 jeeps, we had 2 jeeps. The 3rd and 4th jeep were not hit. The first 2 jeeps were hit.
Okay.
So we made it on into town and set up a little, about a 4-story residence building on the edge of town.
Was empty? Was vacant?
We ran some folks out of it. We had a couple of fellows who were hurt, wounded, one badly.
Do you remember their names?
No, one was a fellow Stevens from Alabama, I remember. I don't remember the names of the others. We thought that in view of the fact that we had a couple of fellows wounded and one badly wounded, we knew we ought to try to find some medical help for him. We had no medics with us. So we asked a couple of the fellows to sort of rummage around through the town, which was not a big town, and see if there was a doctor, a resident doctor, and if so, to bring him over there. So about an hour later, I guess, the fellows came back and they had a German doctor. And he had a little bag with him, but he had absolutely nothing. He had no bandages, he had no medicines, he had nothing. He was in effect of no value to us. We had hoped that he could come in and help our fellows who were wounded, but he couldn't.
Did you all have German language skills between you?
There were 1 or 2 fellows in the platoon that did. Yeah, I didn't have.
And were the people there generally hostile or friendly?
I would say they were sort of neutral. They knew the war was over for them. It was just a matter of days. And it was, if you remember, this was April 16th, and VE Day was the 7th of May. So they knew the war was over, so they were afraid of us, but they were not hostile, I wouldn't say, you know. Anyway, we spent the night in this house that night, and our friends from our company were there the next morning, about mid-morning, about 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning. They evacuated the wounded, including myself, and I was amazed that they sent me back to the hospital. I didn't think, you know, I thought my arm was skint and that was about all. But they sent us back to an evacuation hospital, they called it.
What was an evacuation hospital?
People who were injured or hurt were sent back to this hospital, which was a field hospital, really. And then they sent you back to another hospital, which was an evacuation hospital. They were going to evacuate you from the theater of operations.
By air?
In my case, it was by, they flew me on a plane from Paris I'd been evacuated back to Paris, and then in the hospital there I was sent to, let's see, we stopped in the Azores and then flew to New York. There was a funny little incident that occurred in New York when we landed in New York, getting home, and this was by plane. We landed at Santini Field, as I recall the name of the Army Air Base. The Red Cross was there, and the Red Cross greeted us all and said they had a present for us, and the present was a long-distance call home, free. So, with the South Carolina accent, I got hold of a New York City operator and told her that I wanted telephone number 61 in 96, South Carolina. She says, I have the number. What's the name of the town? And it took me quite a while to try to explain to her that the number was 61 and the town was 96, South Carolina. She finally cut me off, says, all these drunks coming home. So I never did get a Red Cross still owes me a phone call. I never did get my phone call completed. But a couple of days after we were in Santini, I was transferred down to...
The Santini Field was in New York, is that right?
Beg pardon?
Santini Field is in New York?
Yeah, was in New York, yeah. I was transferred down to an Army hospital in Richmond, Virginia, called McGuire General Hospital, I guess it was. It turned out that my problem was that the nerves in my right hand had been severed from the wound in my wrist, and I couldn't use my fingers much, and they decided that what they would do would operate on me and try to tie the nerves back together where they'd been severed and see if they would regenerate feeling and all. And they did this, and it didn't. One thing about that operation, it took about 6 to 9 months to know whether the nerve had regenerated or not. So at McGuire General Hospital, they did the operation. They thought they did a good job. And for me to recuperate, they sent me down to Welch Convalescent Hospital at Daytona Beach, Florida. That wasn't too hard to take.
And approximately when was this?
This must have been when they sent me down to Welch Convalescent Hospital. Must have been around June or July of 45. 45.
Okay.
After about 5 or 6 months at Welch Convalescent Hospital, they sent me back to McGuire General Hospital in Augusta, Georgia, in Richmond, Virginia. And they decided that I would be better off if I was at Welch, no.
Victor. Okay.
The hospital in Augusta, what was the name of it? Maybe I'll come back to it if I think of the name of
Hospital in Augusta?
Augusta, Georgia, Army Hospital in Augusta, Georgia, where they operated on me again, on my arm. And this must have been in August of 46, I guess. Summer of 46, sometime in the late summer of 46. So again, I was faced with several months not knowing what they'd done. So I went to the colonel in charge of the hospital and told him I had only finished 3 years of school, and that if he could give me a leave to go back and finish school. He said, I can't do that, but said I can give you 30 days and you can come back, and then I give you another 30 days and then you come back. So.
And during the interims, for example, when you were in Welch Convalescent, after you had the surgery down there, were you, over those 4 or 5, 6 months that you were down there, were you given military responsibilities?
No.
You were recovering?
I was recovering.
Yes.
No, there was no operation at Welch. Operation was at McGuire General in Richmond. And the recovery was supposedly, the name of the hospital was a convalescent hospital, so that's what it was. I remember a lot of recovery at the Sea Breeze Manor in Daytona Beach. But they sent me, Oliver General Hospital is the name of the hospital in Augusta, Oliver General Hospital. So they sent me back to Oliver General Hospital, and they operated again. And it was then that I was faced again with several months before they knew whether things were going to work or not. And that's when I got the colonel in charge of the hospital to allow me to go back to school. So I went back to Clemson and graduated. And then went back to Oliver General Hospital, I guess in July. This is 47 now. And they discharged me from the hospital in the Army in September of 47. And that's pretty much the story.
When you went back to Clemson, had your experiences, it had only been a couple of years since you'd been there as a young student, and you had seen so much in the interim. How had that changed your experience going back to Clemson?
Well, the experience was totally different from the time I was there the first time. Remember, I told you that Clemson was a military school. It was ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps. It was a total military operation when I was first there. Now you've got people who've been in combat and been all over the world, and they're coming back to Clemson. They wanted no part of that military life, military school routine, you know. So it was a totally different experience. Everybody coming back there was civilians, you know, some of the people that I knew. Go back there and finishing up school, so it was a completely different experience.
Was it difficult to see that military aspect, having gone through what you'd just gone through, or
not really, because
you just wanted a degree in...
That's pretty much the way we felt, and Clemson was no longer a military school anyway. They had ROTC, but it would be like some of the high schools that you may be familiar with, where they have an ROTC unit there.
While you were abroad, were you able to communicate at all with family or friends via telephone or letters, or?
Letter was the only way, yeah.
And were you able to do that frequently, or was it a rare experience that you could send or receive a letter?
I could have sent them more frequently than I did, I think. The biggest problem was finding the time and place to write the letter. Because we were pretty much on the move after we hit France. But I could have, the communication was by letter, and I could have done like nearly everybody else better if it had a chance, sort of.
And your Clemson classmates who had also enlisted, were you able to keep up with them through the war and after the war, or?
A lot of them, not all of them. It's funny you ask, because I'm going back to, we were the class of 44. I'm going back to a class reunion in June. So there are 2 or 3 of them around Atlanta that I see. There are a number more that I'll see when I go back in June. Too. A lot of them are gone now, too, of course.
Any special mementos that you have from your war experience?
The only memento I have is a dagger, a German dagger, that obviously was worn on a belt. The belt was through here. In fact, it looks like it was made with a belt. But this is, and if you ask me how I got it home, I can't tell you.
Can I hold it up close
Sure.
towards the camera?
Yeah, you can see the swastika there in the handle.
This is the insignia. How did you come to possess this?
I took this off of a German soldier that we captured up around Bitch. And when I got to the Army hospital back in Paris, I had Army boots and fatigues and all that, and when I left the hospital, I had nothing. I came home in pajamas to New York, and I didn't get any clothing that I remember until I was down in McGuire Journal. I could not have had this on me at the time. I had clothes somewhere. I don't remember where they were. They may have been stored in a warehouse or somewhere. I don't know where they were. But somebody that knew me apparently got this to my locker. Most officers had a foot locker somewhere. I never knew where mine was, because I think it came back to stateside while I was in the hospital, and I think this was in the locker. I don't remember putting it in the foot locker, and I know I didn't have it on me, or I wouldn't have it, so I don't know how it got back.
Can you tell me more about the occasion where you captured the German?
Well, the Germans, there were about a half a dozen of them, I guess, that we captured there in Bitch. They had been behind a hedgerow, a row of bushes or hedges, and shooting at us as we sort of came into town. And we snuck some fellows around behind them, and they surrendered without much of a fight. And one of them had this on him, and I remember taking it off of him as we took the rifles and other gear from them. That's where I had the motorcycle experience.
Tell me more about that. Whose motorcycle was it?
It belonged to one of these German soldiers, and I was happy to return it to him if he wanted it. I was trying to ride it down the hill there after we'd sort of settled down after taking them, and I'd never been on a motorcycle before, so I didn't know what I was doing, and I really didn't know how to stop it, and I finally just slid down, and I think that ended the motorcycle too.
Anything else you'd like to add to the story?
I don't know of anything right off.
You received any particular awards related to your service?
None particularly.
Did you receive a Purple Heart?
Yes, I have a Purple Heart. But I was in some of the campaigns. I was in the Rhineland campaign, the Central European campaign, and I received the Purple Heart in the 34th headquarters of the 34th Evacuation Hospital. Combat Infantry Badge, European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with 2 bronze stars, American Campaign Medal, and a World War II Victory Medal. That's about it.
That's quite a few awards and medals. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome.
This has been very enjoyable.
Thank you.